Hello, welcome. My name is Craig Broman, and along with many Christians who are in various industries and professions across our country, that makes up the organisation called City Bible Forum. City Bible Forum is committed to asking the bigger questions, and the question tonight is, do we fear the future? You know, 6 months ago, we slated this topic and thought about it, and at the time we thought, you know, artificial intelligence, we thought climate change, economy, jobs. Never in our wildest dreams would we have thought that on this night we would be dealing with a topic that everybody in the world is consumed and thinking about. It's one of the greatest public emergencies we've had, nothing like it since World War II even. And the irony is that we can't even get you to come together to talk about what we're fearing in all this. Tonight, we welcome the Honorary Stephen Mullighan, Shadow Treasurer for SA. We have Dr. Sam Chan, who's Public Communicator for City Bible Forum. And they're going to talk for 15 minutes each about what they think is triggering some of our fears of the future. After that, we're going to move to question and answer. And at that point, they'll be joined by a panellist, Dr. Andrew Giles, who's a senior consultant at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and he's in the emergency department there. So it will be an interesting discussion together. So I'm going to ask you at home, wherever you are tonight, and for the skeleton group of people who are here, the team, to please give a warm Adelaide welcome to Stephen Mullighan. Thank you, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much, Craig, for that introduction, and it is a real pleasure to be here this evening to talk about, as Craig said, something that could not be more topical than it is today, and that's how we feel about the future and whether we do fear the future. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are here this evening on the lands of the Kaurna people. We acknowledge and respect their relationship with their land, and we also acknowledge their leaders, past, present and emerging. Can I thank the City Bible Forum for putting this evening on. As we've said, this could not be more important, but it's also important, I think, to come together to talk about how we are going as a community with particular issues and how we're going with our thoughts about our futures, both individual and whole, is very important as well. I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion later on with Dr. Sam Chan and Dr. Andrew Giles, which I hope you find just as engaging as the rest of tonight. As a Member of Parliament, as a community representative, I'd like to think that I've got a perspective on how people generally feel about the future, about how they feel themselves fitting into the community and how they see that going forward. I feel very much, it's my observation, that people do feel a little fearful about the future. People do feel apprehensive, they feel a bit anxious, they sometimes feel that their livelihoods are fraught and at risk. And I don't think necessarily that this has always been the case for our community. It's my view that this is something which has emerged only really in recent decades. And I also think that there are some fundamental reasons for that, the change in nature of how we conduct our daily lives. And I wanted to touch on a few of those elements in my contribution tonight. We should all be used to change. Our lives are constantly changing. From the moment we are born to right now, to the end of our lives, we are on a constant continuum of change. And a lot of that change is exciting, a lot of it is fun, a lot of it's extremely rewarding. And when you think about the different stages of our lives, it's easy to see why that's the case. As we're growing up, of course, we're learning and we're having thousands upon thousands of new stimuli put to us that we are engaging with for the first time and responding to. As we get older, we form relationships beyond our families. We go through school and perhaps further education. We form personal relationships with people we want to spend at least part of our lives with. I was going to say the rest of our lives, but that as well. And we also enter the workforce. We might make serious financial commitments like buying a house or moving house, for example. We also exit out of the workforce eventually and enter into a later phase of life in retirement. This change is a constant for us, and so we shouldn't be, and I don't think we are generally, frightened of change. But it's the nature of some of the change that we're confronting which many people are leading to that anxiousness, that anxiety and that fearfulness which sometimes pervades their mindset when they're thinking about their lives. If you think of how we work today compared to how we worked, say, 40 or 50 years ago, it's easy to see the radical change which all of us have had to experience as that change has taken effect. It's no secret that we are all working longer. Whether we are paid to work longer or whether we just find ourselves working longer hours in the workday. The 8-hour workday is something which vanished long ago for the vast majority of the Australian workforce. And the nature of our work is almost all pervasive now. We all seem to have mobile devices, perhaps multiple ones, many of them loaded with, unfortunately, our email accounts, and we're expected to respond immediately either to a phone call or a text message or an email. And work has started to consume more and more of the time that we spend awake during the day, or even perhaps time that we should be asleep at night. So work is becoming all pervasive. Certainly in the last 10 years, people's work has not been remunerated as well as what it was before the global financial crisis. Wages growth, not just here in Australia, but in most Western countries, has been suppressed. And people are finding the work that they are doing is not generating a pay packet which is broad enough to continue consuming as much of those costs in their daily lives. And that causes stress. And of course, we're not the only ones in our household who are working and working so much these days. It is common, particularly for people in relationships, that both people are working. And that is a radical change from what we had 40 or 50 years ago. My mother, for example, was part of the generation where it was expected, if not required, that once a woman fell pregnant, let alone had the baby, that they were from then on out of the workforce. And that's certainly not the case today. And we make the choice as people to enter the workforce not for the fun of it on most reasons. It's because we need the money, because life seems so much more expensive these days. Housing costs in Australia, for example, are far greater than what they used to be. We feel that we need to maintain a much higher standard of living for ourselves these days compared to what our parents or our grandparents do, and that all costs money. And so having a dual income household now has become the norm rather than the exception. That then carries its impacts out into our family lives as well. With both parents working, there's the juggle between, for example, when we have children, the morning drop-off and the afternoon pick-up, the running around after children as they grow older and they have their own activities. Our daily lives are frantic. They're very, very busy and quite stressful. And it's not unusual for the adults in the household to get home sometimes after dark and collapse in a heap, given the efforts they've had at work, getting the kids to school and so on, and attending to all of the children's extracurricular activities. And that is, I think, perhaps a lead cause of why people are feeling anxious and uncertain about their futures. We feel like we're running at maximum capacity now, perhaps even beyond our maximum capacities now, just to lead our daily lives. Financially, the Australian Bureau of Statistics has been recording measurements of financial stress for the community. And over time, we've seen people experiencing one of the 14 or so measures of financial stress that they assess through the 5-yearly census. They've seen those escalate, where more and more people are feeling like their finances are under strain, despite having a dual income household, for example. We also feel that for many of us, if something was to happen in our lives, if we were to lose our jobs or suffer some other shock, that we would not be able to keep going with our daily lives in the same way that we have been. And there's a very prominent financial commentator in the Australian media who uses the statistic that more than 40% of Australians would not be able to meet their immediate financial commitments if they were not paid for a month. And for a lot of people, that's very distressing, because the nature of work as well has become less secure. There are far fewer full-time jobs now than what there were 40 years ago, or even 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. There are many more people in casual work or part-time work, and there are many more people with multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. These are all sources of stress and anxiety and frustration for people. And then on top of that, our lives feel like they are under constant attack from external invaders. I mentioned devices before, but social media is a terrific example about how huge segments of our days have been overtaken by something that 15 years ago we could not even have conceived of. We spend this enormous amount of time looking at Facebook and Twitter and messaging apps and so on top of our work emails, for example, and we feel like we don't have any time genuinely to ourselves and less time with our families. That is stressful. That also contributes to anxiety. We've also gone through a really radical change in our community nationally over the last 40 to 50 years. Our country has been on a deliberate path to open itself up to better engage with the global community, particularly economically. And that has come with really extraordinary benefits and advantages. Our standards of living have, of course, massively increased and improved over that period. We have access to a range of better, more affordably priced goods, services, products that we couldn't have even imagined ago, perhaps 20 years ago, let alone 40 years ago. And that has contributed to our improving standards of living. But it's also made our livelihoods more fraught, as particularly a lot of those industries that people have relied upon for jobs, whether it's been as breadwinners in the family, or even that children could look forward to as they left school and wanted to enter the workforce. A lot of those industries are shrinking, diminishing, or even evaporating, as Australia as a country has found itself very difficult to compete in selling products on the global marketplace. And that's meant that people have fears about their job security in those industries. And we only have to look in recent times in manufacturing in Australia to see how that sector has shrunk. And even a sector which continues to grow year on year, like agriculture, for example, as we send more of our wheat and our wool and our meat overseas. While that industry expands, of course, it's becoming so highly productive that it needs less workers to contribute to that industry. All of this leads or contributes to the community feeling like they don't quite know where to turn to have a safe, livable livelihood going forward, a reliable job that they can bank on. And it's easy to see, if you pile all of these anxieties up on top of one another, that all of us must be ready to walk lemming-like off the edge of a cliff and hopefully be embraced by a cool abyss. But we don't. And I think it's important to ask why. Because despite suffering all of these pressures, all of these stresses, all of these anxieties, we manage. and we cope. We manage within ourselves as individuals. We manage amongst our broader networks, our families, our friends, our other loved ones. We manage as communities, whether it's suburbs or states, and we manage as a country. I think it's because we recognise that this is not just us going through this. It's not just me, it's all of us. We're all in this together. We are, I think, pretty good at being pretty pragmatic about our circumstances. And we are reasonably good at dialing back what we experience as fear back towards being something more manageable, something that we're able to rationalise and deal with. And the other thing that I wanted to say tonight is I think it's important we reflect on how we're able to do that as people, not necessarily as community leaders, as pastors or as community representatives like members of parliament, but just as individuals. And I think we need to remind ourselves that we've got plenty of tools in our own toolkits so that we can manage these uncertainties, these anxieties and these fears. Part of tonight, I think, is a contribution towards helping not only ourselves and City Bible Forum participants better manage those fears, but perhaps talk about how our communities can better do that. One thing I didn't mention, which I should put on the record as a community representative, is another contributor to fear and anxiety, feeling like our lives are able to be invaded, is that we also feel sometimes we lack control, and those people who have traditionally provided control for us, we perhaps have less faith in them being able to provide that control to us. And I'm talking, for example, about politicians, not far from second-hand car salesmen in the trust rankings in our community, and that loss of faith in this form of community leadership is really troubling because there is a real need to be demonstrating this. And I think what we're seeing at the moment with government responses to coronavirus are governments working as hard as they possibly can to provide that reassurance and that re-establishment of trust at this difficult time. We also, I think, need to think about what we can have faith in, and many of us, of course, have faith in God. Can we re-establish faith in leadership of our communities beyond, for example, politicians, or beyond our employers, or beyond those other community institutions that we have traditionally found confidence and leadership in? And one of the things that I think has been most beneficial for people during difficult times in recent years has been having had the confidence to re-engage with their local communities, speaking with their neighbours, speaking with people down at the local sporting club, speaking with other people when they attend, for example, City Bible Forum functions, or going down to the local Lions Club or the Probus Club, and realising that not only are we all in this together, we're all facing similar pressures, but we all have ways that we can help each other deal with these fears, these concerns and these anxieties. I'll leave my contribution there. I hope that's been of some interest or benefit to you, and I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.